students come out with their 100 grand worth of debt after 5 years of study, having been told that this is the right way to feed. And, they believe it, because if you don't believe what you've been taught, what have you spent 100 grand on? The smaller we look down, the more we lose of the bigger picture. And I think that's where, medicine, human and veterinary and science generally has gone. It's become chasing the next research dollar. And as you say, not observing what goes on and saying, okay, so this is the observation, therefore the theory has got to fit the observation. It's like, well, this is the theory, so how do we do the experiment to prove it? And this is what nutrition is, certainly on the veterinary side, I'm sure on the human side, is based almost entirely on.
Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Roger Meacock, who is a veterinarian who is kind enough to give us his insights on optimal food for both humans and animals as he sees it. Roger, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Dr. Chaffee. That's absolutely brilliant. I was a heavy meat eater before I saw you on YouTube, and it never occurred that maybe humans should be carnivores. And then I saw your video on plants are trying to kill you, and the title absolutely grabbed me. So yeah, great title there. And I watched it and I thought, this makes so much more sense. And as a vet, I've been, promoting our pet carnivores, our dogs and cats, because that's what they are. They're not omnivores, they are absolutely carnivores. I've been promoting the raw meaty bones diet for them for the last 25 years, and actually having then switched to carnivore myself and listened to a few more of your podcasts, it made me so much more aware of how we're doing dogs and cats so badly by predominantly feeding them plant-based foods, with the kibbles especially, but even, the raw, there's sort of a whole movement into raw feeding, but it's such a wide encompassing term now that with, something like in the UK, there's something like 90 different commercial companies all doing raw, and you think, well, raw meat and bone, how can you get variations on that? But they do, and there's certain of them will be putting plant material into it because it's a cheaper ingredient to bulk it up and all the rest of it. And they're pre-grinding it, which is another problem that we can talk about as well, because the physical aspects of the food is really important too. And I just became really conscious, having sort of been carnivore myself now for a few months, of how I feel when I jump off, fall off the wagon but very rarely now, but to begin with, I did. And it was interesting because I assumed honey was okay to begin with because it's natural. And all of a sudden, and I was sort of mixing it into some yogurt. And after a while, I suddenly, one teaspoonful became two. And it occurred to me, do you know what? This is, and then I think I heard your podcast on honey specifically, and I thought, oh no, I really like that one. And but I got it, and I stopped overnight, and I'm conscious that on the odd day where you can't avoid it and you go out to dinner or something, then it's a little bit more of an awkward situation just to sort of leave or not have any veg. So. But then the next day, I don't feel bad, but I don't feel right. And it's a subtle difference. And I just made me so much more conscious of the harm that we're doing to our pet dogs and cats by not feeding them as proper species a total, appropriate diet. And that's, I've become, I suppose I'd be regarded as fairly hardcore now in terms of even the raw feeding side. But it is, it's a major issue that I can see, and I think we need to sort of get it out there and really make more of an issue of it so people realize, because everybody's doing what they think they should be doing. And to be fair to the vets, they didn't go to vet school and I'm sure that the doctors are saying he didn't go to med school to intend to harm anybody or do any harm, but just the way that nutrition research has been captured, and there's even contracts between the pet food manufacturers and the vet schools as to who's allowed to speak to the students, and what they're allowed to say, that the students come out with their 100 grand worth of debt after 5 years of study, having been told that this is the right way to feed. And they believe it, because if you don't believe what you've been taught, what have you spent 100 grand on?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then so much financial support goes into CPD and conferences, and and supporting all the sales stuff in the practices. So no vets and no doctors are deliberately setting out to harm any of their patients, but the flip side is that they're not willing to really look at it critically and assess the situation to recognize that, what you are, what you eat, food be your medicine, medicine be your food, all these ancient wisdoms that have been forgotten. And I think I read somewhere, only humans are clever enough to make our own food, stupid enough to eat it. And I think there's another bit to that, which is an arrogant enough to think that we can outdo nature.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we were talking, a bit off air, but we were talking about people orchestrating things and pulling strings and trying to manipulate things. And there's another old saying that goes, "You're so sharp, you'll cut yourself." I think you're so brilliant, you're so smart, and you want to manipulate things, and it's just going to backfire. It's going to hurt you. What naturalists did, what scientists did, what real scientists of the world did, is they observed nature and they studied nature and they saw, how does this work? How do I fit in here? And what are some of the laws and the rules that work in the world that I live in? Instead of saying, I've mastered this and now I can control it. That's hubris that's going to end up biting you in the ass. And so, what is the smartest thing to do is look at this, see how the system works and how you can best fit into it. And we're not doing that anymore. We're trying to change it, manipulate it, and make it in our own image. And that's not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Now, I think, wasn't it Richard Feynman who said, if anybody tells you they understand quantum physics, they don't.
Yeah.
And the same is true for nutrition. I think there is so much more to it. Yeah, I mean, I see, when you've sort of recently qualified, maybe you've been out in the wide world a year, 2 years, you probably think you know quite a lot. And then 25, 30 years on, you go, I may have thought I knew 95% of what I needed to know back then, but actually now I realise, I think if we know 0.5% of what there is to know, that's probably a gross exaggeration. And there's aspects to nutrition that it'd be interesting to get your view on this. Obviously everything's quoted in terms of fats, proteins, carbohydrates, and then you've got micronutrients, which are all sort of mushed in together, primarily looking at the minerals, but they don't even consider all 84 of them. They look at just a few, and then maybe some vitamins. And yet I'm thinking, well, actually, if I'm eating meat, it must have some ATP, some NADH, all these other microchemicals that we know are a part of biochemistry, and surely they have some sort of nutritional and enzymes. They have benefits to us as well. One of the things I do differently to you is I have raw dairy. So I've got a farmer who doesn't pasteurize milk, and he's really knowledgeable about his milk. And, he says, the milk actually has enzymes in there, for metabolizing lactose if you need it. And actually, most milk allergies are actually a protein reaction. And if you've got A2 milk, which, different type of casein, then most people can actually drink that okay. But if they go and raw milk is okay, but pasteurization is actually a big problem. So we sort of, the whole of nutrition is skewed by how it tries to break down and reduce everything to these little compartments, and we've got so good at sort of reductionist thinking that we can understand what we think is a very small aspect of something, a biochemical pathway, and actually we've forgotten how it fits into the rest of the body. And the smaller we look down, the more we lose of the bigger picture. And I think that's where medicine, human and veterinary, and science generally has gone, and it's become chasing the next research dollar. And as you say, not observing what goes on and saying, okay, so this is the observation, therefore the theory has got to fit the observation. It's like, well, this is the theory, so how do we do the experiment to prove it? And this is what nutrition is, certainly on the veterinary side, I'm sure on the human side, is based almost entirely on. And they won't do the basic control of comparing the ancestral, diet of raw meat and bones versus kibble. And yet, people will turn around to me and go, well, you've got to prove your raw meaty bones is true. And going, well, I rest, I put into the witness stand, millions of years. Kibble started with a chap called Spratt and Crufts, who just decided to have a dog show to promote the kibble, and that started in the 1860s. So we've got 160 years of commercial pet food driven by profit, based on cheap ingredients that cause a problem, versus millions of years. And yet I'm supposed to prove my bit, and it's like, I don't think so. You've got to prove that, that the way science works is the one that comes along is got to prove that it's better than what came before. And if you don't do that, and you're not prepared to do that, then that actually tells me how little confidence and I suspect it's a bit like smoking. If back in the day they knew how harmful it was and just didn't, and they'd done the research and didn't want to publish it. And I'm sure the same has been done on the dog and cat side. And just, I could keep on going forever, but there's just how they, the trials they do for pet food is, you wouldn't believe it, Anthony. It's like they've got to start with a minimum of 8 dogs. They can feed the food ad lib or according to energy requirements, and it only lasts 26 weeks, so 6 months, and only 6 out of the 8 dogs have got to complete the trial. They're not allowed to lose more than 10 or 15% of body weight, but they can put on as much as they like. And then we wonder why there's obesity is the main problem, a huge problem in veterinary medicine. And how can you feed something for 6 months? So they've got to be a year old. So a year-old dog is going to have very different requirements from a 14, 15-year-old dog. Not that many of them are getting there these days. But that is, they're not comparable. And if they're only looking at proteins, carbs, and carbohydrates, and the fact that there's no dietary requirement for carbohydrates is just totally overlooked. So and then this allows them to call a pet food complete. Well, it's not complete. It's only got, some of them have only got like 4% animal derivatives, which could be any sort of rendered God knows what from a carcass that didn't go into the human food chain. So it just, you just get exasperated that it's reached such a level. It is $1 billion pet food fraud. And I actually got a friend who's a vet in Australia, Tom Lonsdale's written a book called $1 Billion Pet Food Fraud, and we're trying to. He stands for election for the Royal College elections every year, and I nominate him. I'm one of the nominees for him. And, we've been up to the Royal College to have meetings with the president and say, look, this is a problem with pet foods. The veterinary profession is on board with it. We're colluding. We're ignoring the harm that the pet food does. And Tom stands for his election. So he gets, probably 300 to 400 votes a year, which isn't a huge number. He's not threatening to get on council. But whenever he's asked any questions in advance, he's a one-trick pony. Mm-hmm. Everything gets brought back to the harm of done by pet food, so that we can always say whoever votes for him is voting because of the harm that the pet foods are doing. And yet when we spoke to one of the presidents, he said, well, if we put a hamster up, they get 400 votes. And you go, you rude git, That is, you've got 400 professional vets who are absolutely, unequivocally saying that they can see a harm caused by pet food, and the Royal College is refusing to do anything to, even to initiate a proper trial. And they're quite happy for the veterinary profession to carry on selling food that's marketed as complete or even prescription when it hasn't even got any prescription anything in it.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, the Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
And yet there was a study done, it was only a few years ago, where there's something like, I think there's less than 40% of the foods actually met the minimum nutritional requirements. And even some of those so-called hypoallergenic diets had proteins that weren't supposed to be there in there. And yet it hasn't changed the behavior of any of the vet practices. They'll still push it and sell it. And, they're not trying to do any harm, as I said before. But unfortunately, what's the definition of a poison? Is it something that kills you in 5 minutes, or is it something that causes major health issues in 10 years? And with cancer hugely on the rise in dogs these days, then, the longevity is coming down, the diseases are going up, the chronic diseases are going up, and it, it is a welfare problem as far as I'm concerned. But owners want to be able to trust their vet, and for 99 times out of 100 they can. Most of them are brilliant. They'll know all the disease pathways, and they'll know what the drugs do, and they'll be brilliant surgeons and all the rest of it. But when the nutrition is wrong and it's so fundamental to the whole of health, it's a major thing to be wrong on.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it sort of sounds like the president of the college would almost have to be complicit in all of this, and still want all that funding that comes in from the pet food companies, but it may not do anything, but possibly like a petition, getting thousands of people to sign this saying, hey, no, we want you to look into this, might hold a bit more weight. But it is a bit sad. You have this corporate capture. They've got control over all the different industries, and people just don't realize it. I totally agree with you when you said that you have to, the new kid on the block has to prove themselves. They're trying to pretend as if you're eating vegetables and humans and eating kibble in dogs and cats. Like that's the established scientifically evidenced way of eating. Whereas this meat, you have to prove that. It's like, no, sorry. We've been doing that forever. That's established. We know that's fine. We know that's healthy. We've been doing that forever. This is new. This is brand new. You have to prove this. You're the guys who have to show some evidence. Of course, they're not, and that's why they're trying to shift the argument and put it on you, put you on the defensive, so that they don't actually have to show their evidence. right?
Yeah.
So that they don't have to say like, well, this shows that this is better. This shows that this is an improvement. This shows that this is very safe and effective. They're saying, no, you have to prove that. No, I don't. No, you do. We've always done this. Now you've come in and changed something. Things are worse. And you're trying to say that it's not your fault. Okay, no, you have to prove that. Or some vets that I've spoken to, I'm sure, and they're fresh out of the gate from vet school, and I'm sure this came straight from veterinary school because I've heard this sort of regurgitated, was that the increased prevalence of diseases in pets is because of these damn puppy mills, and they're just intensively breeding and all these sorts of things. When I was like, isn't golden retriever a pure breed already? Isn't that already as intensively bred as you can get?
Yeah, I mean, it is criminal. That is to say, there is a tendency to try and blame things on genetics. And there was actually two Germans who did a study into hip dysplasia in dogs. And, you can imagine the Germans were very strict about making sure that they bred properly, followed lines, did hip scoring. You can do x-rays when dogs are sort of a year old to see how the joints are forming and score them. And then you make sure you only use supposedly good dogs with others to make sure you keep the line straight. And they basically concluded that, got a long story short, they concluded that the genetics had very little, if anything, to do with it. It was never proven that it was genes based, but they absolutely said that it was kibble that was the main cause. The nutritional deficiencies of feeding kibble were the problems. And then a few years later, they widened it to say it wasn't just hip dysplasia, but it was all orthopedic developmental diseases were caused by kibbles. And of course, what happens is the breeders, they feed a certain way. And then when somebody picks a puppy up, they tell them how they feed them and they keep in contact. And so what tends to happen is the feeding remains consistent down the lines, but actually, and then they blame it on the genetics, and it's not. It's then there's a whole thing of epigenetics around it as well. And there was a chap called Pottinger who did a study on cats that I'm sure you're aware of, that he did it with 900 cats, I think, over 10 years, and he fed one group of them, raw meat and also milk, and he fed the other group kibbles, and the health deteriorated rapidly in the group that was fed the kibbles and maintained in the raw meat and milk fed cats. But interestingly, then he tried to swap after a couple of generations. He tried to swap them back, and what he found was that there was still deteriorations in the third generation, having been on the derived from the kibble fed cats, but swapped to the proper diet. There was still problems three generations down.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at it from the human side, I think there was a study done, wasn't there, with the aspartame, where they gave it to some mice, and they found that it was one exposure of aspartame caused depression in the third generation down.
Wow.
And so which shows that this generational thing happens in humans as well. So with dogs and animals, we've got a much shorter generational gap because animals die at younger ages. And so what we're seeing in the animal kingdom, where there is deterioration through disease and ill health and all the rest of it as a result of poor feeding, that's what we're storing up for humans, and it's probably already coming through. But in the next couple of generations, if they carry on with these high sugar, highly processed foods, we're going to be breeding epigenetic nutritional problems that, even if they swap back to a proper species appropriate diet, they're going to be they're still going to be having problems, for a few generations to reverse all the poor feeding and practices that we've had up to now. So, this isn't, it's not as simple as you change diet and you immediately become 100% well again. There are long-term problems. You know, and certainly you see it. People have been saying, "Well, I've been raw feeding my dog for, you know, for 6 months or a couple of years, and you know, I'm still got an itchy dog." And you go, "Well, you know, I mean, you're doing it right, but you know, or are you feeding plants still?" And if you know, because sometimes it doesn't just come right that quickly. You will get some individuals who respond within a couple of weeks, but there are other individuals where it will take months, and then there are others, I'm sure, where it will take generations of correct feeding to fully get back to the best possible optimum health that is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and that's something that I don't think we fully grasp. I love the Pottinger's cat experiment because that just sort of illustrates the importance of proper nutrition, even if it's just slightly off. This can, even if it doesn't kill you, this has significant health ramifications, not only to you as the individual, but to the next generation and the next generation and further generations down the track. And then, very interestingly, you fix the diet, but there's knock-on effects going down the chain. I think with BPAs, like the different weird plastics that can be hormonally disruptive. They did some studies in mice as well that female mice exposed to BPAs, it stays in your body for a long time, and then the mice children, you know, the next generation, they had smaller gonads, so they had hypogonadism, so smaller penises. And then the second generation had a Jew, so no exposure in the second generation, and the third generation still had the effects. And it wasn't until the fourth generation that they came away from that. And so we don't have a great understanding, or at least the general population doesn't have a great understanding. We're starting to learn this, and you know, having these conversations to get that message out there, but as a population, we don't really understand just how massive an effect what we do now and what our parents did and their parents did, how big of a role that can have on us and our kids and their kids and their kids. So, you know, I'm doing this now. I'm being as healthy as I can be. I plan on having kids, you know, and both me and my wife will be carnivores, and we'll raise our kids carnivores, and they're going to be better off than we were. But their kids are going to be better off than they were, and their kids are going to be better off than they were, and then eventually we'll get back to normal humanity again, and that'll be great. But you know, it goes to show back with something you said before, which was, you know, you come out and you think you know so much, and then 25 years in the game, you're like, oof, maybe I didn't know all that much. You know, it's you have to understand that there's so much we don't know. And you know, one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Sowell is, it takes a lot of knowledge to understand just how ignorant you are. And so you have to learn so much and understand so much so that you can finally peek over this tiny little molehill of knowledge that you've attained, so you can look at a vast mountain range of things you have no clue about. And you are not going to. You can start exploring them and looking at them, but you will never crest every mountain. You just won't. No one can. You know, the smartest, most brilliant, most learned person in human history never knew even 1% of the totality of human knowledge. It's not possible. And the totality of human knowledge is nothing compared to what's available. And so we need to recognize that, and we need to understand and have a bit of humility about this. It was a great Mark Twain quote. And as I get older, I appreciate Twain a lot more. And I think my dad used quotes of Twain's against me as a kid, and so I didn't like him because of that. But one of these quotes that he said was sort of in those lines about, you know, learning as you grow older. He said, you know, when I was a teenager, you know, I thought my dad was just the dumbest person on earth, didn't know anything. And then when I turned, you know, became an adult, I was really impressed by how much he'd learned. How much smarter he got, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many different ramifications. I mean, one of the things that I'm interested to get your thoughts on this is, you know, the way we bring up our animals, how they have an impact on our food. Because obviously there's this whole grass-fed versus grain-fed
Mm.
feedlot, in terms of our food. But it's interesting. When John, my friendly good friend, dairy farmer who does all the raw milk, he no longer feeds his cattle grain.
Yeah.
And when he stopped feeding them grain, they blanked him for 6 months. They used to come into the parlor, obviously, every certain time every day. They got into the habit of it. And when he stopped feeding them parlor feed, which was basically a hard feed, all the grain feed,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't come in. He'd have to go and get them. And for 6 months, he said, I could tell they were angry with me for not feeding their addiction. And yet you wouldn't have thought that cattle, being herbivores, would be addicted to grains in that way, because it is a plant food. You wouldn't think that would happen. And so it was absolutely fascinating. It never occurred to me that might even occur. And so I think, obviously all these cows now live at grass, and he gives them sort of hay haylage during the winter. But consequently, his yields are down. He sort of probably averages around 2,000 litres a cow per lactation, whereas now commercial farms, they're up around 10,000 litres a cow.
Yeah.
So, they're on a metabolic knife edge to get them up there. And you think, what does that effect have, obviously, for the milk? And because obviously nutrition goes from the cows into the milk, what effect does that have on the calves for the next generation? Because you've got that whole nutrimelomics and metabolomics and things that link DNA expression to food, and development as well. And then obviously what effect does that have on the beef that we eat? Because it's interesting with some of the dogs, if they're itchy and it gets identified, they think chicken is a problem that they're allergic to, and they think that's because, or they've been on kibble, so that they think it's a grain problem, and then they swap to the raw meaty bones, and then they have problems with chicken, and they think it's because the chicken are grain fed. So it's interesting to get your idea of what you think, or where how much does the food that we eat, how they're fed, does that affect the quality of the meat, and obviously therefore us?
I think it does. The question is how much. Most people seem to do fine from when I check their nutrients and vitamins and minerals and hormones and things like that, and just their general health. They seem to do really well just on normal meat. And obviously, of course, the issue is supply and access. And so if you don't have access to the highest quality grass-fed and finished, then you don't. But the grain finished and things like that are still a lot better than any plant you're going to eat, certainly, and much better than most alternatives, even from meat, as far as the grain-fed cows. And so if you look at the micronutrients, and this is probably something more about than I do, but I've just seen different regenerative farmers talk about their beef and how they've had them tested, and they can have 4 or 5 times the number of micronutrients that normal store-bought beef would have, grain-finished beef would have. And so that's an objective difference, right? And then there are some studies that I've seen discussed where they grain feed like intensively, so like a high grain percentage for 3 months. After about 3 months, they run out of omega-3s. They're just sort of all omega-6s at that point. So you need omega-3s, you need the DHAs and the EPAs, and so are we lacking on that? Are we lacking on some of the micronutrients? Most people seem to do very well with just store-bought meat, but I think there is an objective difference. And when I got just a grass-fed and finished cow, and I got an older cow, which I think was the best tasting meat that I've ever had in my life. It wasn't gamey, but it was just a stronger beef flavor. It just tasted more steak. There's just a more steak flavor to it. And it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. And the fat was just dark yellow, and it tasted amazing. And instead of feeling sort of tired and just sort of, oh yeah, drowsy, go to bed, I was like supercharged. I just wanted to go and just beat a gazelle to death. I just felt amazing.
Have you noticed if you're cooking something like grass-fed steak compared to something that isn't, it actually smells different
It does.
when it's cooking.
Yeah.
It almost you can almost smell there's an element of almost sweetness about it that is different. So there is definitely a difference there. And of course, with BSE in the UK in the 1990s, it always struck me as absolutely stupid, because what they did was they said it because you didn't get BSE in cattle under something like 3 years old. Therefore, you can eat cows under 3. You can eat beef from cattle under 3 years old, and you can't eat older ones. And at the time, I remember thinking, I'd rather have meat from a 6-year-old that hadn't expressed it than have meat from a younger one that hasn't had the opportunity. And that's I remember at the time thinking that was really stupid, but that's how once the people start thinking wrongly, it sort of manifests and goes across the board. And it's almost like, well, if we don't see it, it can't be there. And you go, well, that's what sort of attitude that came from, kid head in the sand attitude, where, and yet these are adults who are supposedly the chief science officers at the time, saying, basically using that sort of reasoning and logic to govern the whole food chain. And then when we briefly mentioned, we've got the mRNA platform potentially. Have been some papers to show that it can promote prion formation, and so my concern is if mRNA products get used in our food producing animals, are we going to have that situation where there will be prions in the meat that we eat, and it will be from animals which haven't had time to express the problem? And that's a future concern that I have had, and I've actually written to the Veterinary Medicines Directive in the UK with an open letter that I put together with a scientist called Dr Kevin McCann. And I know there's some, there's Dr Max Thornsbury in the US. He co-signed the letter, and he's concerned about that potential in cattle health later on. And we just don't know. The time isn't being given sufficient time. There is one product that has been licensed in pigs so far called Sequibity, and it was licensed in 2018. And what they basically do is, say, for example, there's an outbreak of swine flu on a pig farm. So the vets will go along and they'll swab it. They'll send the swab off to a lab. The lab will identify the pathogen. They will sequence it, choose a gene of interest, and then they'll make up an mRNA product which will get the body to manufacture this protein of interest. And then they'll send that mRNA product back to the farmer to inject into the pigs. And that whole process takes 8 to 12 weeks. So there is no way of checking whether it's safe. And there might be a different product going to different farms. So it makes pharmacovigilance almost impossible, because you might only have a problem with one farm. If the protein that's been chosen is prionogenic, you might be having, there's no way to identify easily that there's a problem with the product. So, I'm concerned about where, veterinary medicine is going, and also the pressure we're putting on our, on the animals in terms of production, and all the rest of it. So, I think we need to be, as carnivores, we need to be wary of, or aware of what's happening in our food sources, because that will ultimately have impacts on our health potentially now and potentially in the future.
Yes, definitely, and that's what we need to get very active and vocal, and people writing their politicians and Congress people and MPs and things like that, and saying, hey, we don't want this here. We don't want this in our food supply. We don't want just random chemicals being given to our animals that haven't had rigorous decades of testing to know that it's safe. You were saying when we were off camera that there's a potential that some of these prions could potentially man-made prions could and for people that don't understand prions, things like mad cow disease or these other sorts of issues that get into the body. These prions, proteins, are sort of almost like the Borg from Star Trek, where they sort of turn other proteins into copies of themselves and just multiply rapidly and take over an entire nervous system, and you die. And it's very, very serious. We still screen for people for Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease here in neurosurgery. We have to every single patient that's going to get operated on in our neurosurgical program or department gets screened for Creutzfeldt-Jakob. And so it's something that is extremely harmful. And so you don't want this, right? And it's not like this is a bacteria that you can just take an antibiotic for. We don't have a cure for this. You get this, you're going to be in trouble. And you were saying that this could potentially even get into the ground, and that the roots of plants can actually potentially uptake this and get into the leaves. So so the vegans aren't safe either, and the omnivores aren't safe either. And then you obviously animals that eat that as well, and just spreads. And then you've got an unholy situation there where this is actually spread throughout the entire ecosystem in the food chain, in the wild as well as in our livestock. And that would obviously be devastating to the planet in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's sort of on the rise in the US is chronic wasting disease, which is a problem with deer. So, if people are out there hunting to put meat on the table themselves, be careful what you're, check to see what your chronic wasting disease situation is in the area where you're going to be hunting, because you don't want to. There's no proof as yet that it can cross the species barrier. Not all prions will. I don't want to alarm anybody totally unnecessarily, but not all prion diseases will cross species barriers. But obviously, the more that there are, and the more that products are going into use that could trigger it, the greater the risk that you could end up with a super prion that does cross all species barriers without risk. But as you're saying, they found that if prions get into the soil, whether it's through slurry fertilizer or some other way, the plant roots can uptake these prions from the soil and redistribute them potentially into edible parts of the plant. So as you say, it's there will be no safety there for anybody. So it's this is something we all need to be aware of in our food. If you don't eat, you don't live. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, was it? And that was something that I'd seen peripherally, this weird wasting disease in deer. And first of all, can you tell us a bit more about that, what the hell that is? And also, I had heard that Mark Zuckerberg, for some reason, had just decided to go and inoculate, spend $100 million or something like that, inoculating wild deer for some damn reason. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, there's this weird disease popping up. Do you know a bit about that?
There's a few people have looked at that coincidence and put a question mark over it. But yeah, I mean, basically, it is quite, it is a neurological disease of deer. It is spreading quite rapidly. There have been situations where jabs have caused protein misfolding, and as you say, it's like if you remember at school we did a crystal. You put a seed crystal into a strong ionic solution, and the seed, the crystal just grew. Well, that's basically what's happening with these proteins. They're much more stable in a beta-pleated sheet form, to put some science onto it, and and having one there induces the others around them to go into that more stable form as well. So you get this spread of protein misfolding. So it's a problem, and it's not easy. They're not easily destroyed. I'm sure you're aware that the reason why they screen the neurological patients now for surgery is there was a situation where somebody, whether they believed there was a transfer of prion on the surgical instrumentation from one patient to another, even though all the equipment had been properly autoclaved and sterilized. So these aren't very easily got rid of. They are remarkably indestructible, I think was a phrase I once saw about them. So it's an important issue. We've got to sort of think about that this sort of whole food, the veterinary and medical fields sort of we overlap at that food point, really.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, when we have a suspected CJD case, or we can't get proof of this, and we have to hold that equipment. We can't use it. We can't touch it. So I'll have a whole surgical set that just has to sit there. Or if it's the middle of the night and you have someone who needs an emergency surgery, and you can't get next of kin, you can't ask them the questions that you need to. What you really should do, and the only thing that's ethical to do, is just do the damn surgery and then figure it out later and just hold that stuff to the side and get it cleared or thrown away. Because if you don't know, then you have to throw this stuff away. And obviously that's expensive, very expensive for some of this stuff. But, it's a person's life, right? And so otherwise you have to use hand drills, so hand tools, and these things suck. Like the disposable ones, I mean, they're just awful. So you're there just hand cranking this thing and it's getting stuck. I mean, I remember the first case I did like this. It was 3:00 in the morning. We couldn't get any next of kin. No one was answering their phone. It was just like, how do you not care that your wife is dying in the hospital right now? Like, answer the goddamn phone, and kids, everything like that. And so just trying to they wouldn't let us use, the hospital was just like, no, you can't use the actual normal gear. And so I had to like hand crank, and it was the worst thing I've ever seen. It wasn't even like you had like a handle. It was like this little twisty thing on the side, and it just kept getting stuck. And I just kept and I'm not a weak guy,
Sure.
And so it's like, if I'm struggling with this, the other people are going to have a worse time. And I'm just trying to just crank through. I kept getting stuck, kept getting jammed. And it was an absolute piece of garbage. And it ended up making the surgery take far longer than it should have. I mean, this is an emergency case.
Yeah.
Right.
Time is of the essence.
Exactly. You have someone, that's hydrocephalus. They need they need a drain to drain off that fluid, or you need to do a craniotomy. I mean, you do a craniotomy and you've got to use wires and do a little jiggly saw sort of thing. Okay, but I mean, how much extra time are you taking when this is a time critical operation and that person is going to die in a certain period of time? And so, you can't really say that you're going to get it open in time. And so, it's definitely they take it very seriously anyway. It's just, throw all that out.
Maybe that person was a carnivore, because one of the things that we certainly see is the difference in bone densities. And I think certainly, in dogs, if they're not crunching up the bones and actually using their teeth and jaws and putting that pressure through there, then it changes. The periodontal disease, the crookedness of teeth from, and partly there is an element of genetics with that one in terms of how some of the noses have been drastically shortened. But certainly, bone density and facial structure is absolutely determined by things like diet and the proper, the physical aspect of the diet, which is one of the reasons why I hate all these pre-ground pet foods, because part of the function of eating for dogs and cats is that the crunching of the bone and the pulling of the meat off the bone actually has a physical function in keeping the teeth clean and that gum tooth margin strong. Because as you know, if it's not strong, then you can still, even though the teeth might look quite clean, and dog, people shouldn't have to be brushing dogs' teeth. It's ridiculous. Diet does it if it's done properly. But if they're not crunching and using their teeth properly, by having proper bones to do that, then what happens is the gum tooth margin becomes weak, and then you can get ulceration below the gum line, and then bacteria can get into those pockets and then into the bloodstream. And then you get an immune system that's continually having to battle that, that infection that's getting in, and you can get bacterial endocarditis and things in serious situations where more so in the kibbles where the teeth really get furred up and look absolutely horrendous. But it, the physical aspect of the raw diet is really important from that point of view. And that's, again, that's one of the ways in which, the raw feeding on the veterinary side has gone wrong. They've gone more towards pre-grinding instead of going, well, actually, you don't. You want to feed it in raw meaty bone lumps. And the other aspect of that, one of the big things that the raw food gets attacked from is bacterial contamination. And you can all get salmonella and E. coli, and yet so many dogs are being fed raw and the owners aren't all dropping like flies. But actually what happens is if you can imagine a chicken and there's some contamination on the outside, maybe there is some salmonella or campylobacter or something on the outside, then if you feed it as a lump, I mean, if I give my terrier, if I give him a drumstick, he basically crunches it up and he swallows it with the meat round the bone. So the meat protects the esophagus as the bone goes down to the stomach. But if there's any contamination on the outside of that meat, the first thing that his stomach acid hits is the bacteria. So it kills off the bacteria first, and then it dissolves the little bits of the bone. So that gets rid of any sharp points because they get dissolved first, and then the meat and everything afterwards. But if everything's being pre-ground and mixed in together, all the bacteria goes into the middle of that bolus of food, and then if it's being mixed with plant material as well, you've got this environment within the stomach that's supposed to be very, very acidic, that will kill all these bacteria and dissolve the bone, and it's been neutralized before it hits the bacteria, and also because of plant material there. And so, we're not actually allowing the stomach to do its proper job in the right order. And that's that's one of the problems I have with the pre-ground stuff. It's and that's how the raw feeders get attacked. Is you're going to cause human health problems by feeding this to the dogs. So it's important that we get this right, because otherwise, that there is going to be problems for raw feeding down the road, and that they'll use whatever they can to to try and attack that. And I think people forget. They think, oh, okay, stomach acid, it's pH 1 or 2 or 3 or something. So it's only what's one between friends. And you go, actually, do you know what? The pH is a logarithmic scale. Yeah. That's the difference between 10, 100 and 1,000. It's not 1, 2, 3. And actually that neutralization of that acid is actually really crucial to the digestion. And then if you say, look, plants will have digestion inhibitors and interference within them as well, chemicals, the anti-nutrients within them as well. And then we wonder why we're getting dogs that are raw fed, given that broader term, and still having problems. And it's like, well, because you're not raw feeding properly. There's good and bad ways to do everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. It's getting better, at least here in Australia. As much as there's a vegan push for humans, they do have raw meat available in the stores. But you're right, it's just a ground up sort of package. But then you can find sometimes they'll have like meat bones and things like that for dogs and things, just sort of scraps on it. And so we try to get those as well. But that's one thing I've spoken to some people here, and they have their pets, and I obviously tell them, it's like, hey, look, we're supposed to eat meat. Dogs are supposed to eat meat. My friends' dogs tend to like me more than them. I think they smell the meat on me and then be like, I can go hunting with this guy. This guy has meat. I can get meat. This guy, let's go. And I always, sort of share the meat and things like that with them. So, but I had a good friend of mine was saying that their dog, and they were all for giving him meat, but his vet said, well, yeah, they like meat, but you should save that. Don't give them meat, because if they ever get sick and they need a pill, then you want something like a treat, what they really like. So you put that
What?
pill in the meat, and then you use the meat. So don't give it meat other times. Just use it as a spare treat. So don't give them meat to make them healthy. Give them things that are going to be substandard so they get sick. So when they get sick, you can use the meat to give them the pill, as opposed to just giving them meat and then having them not get sick. But they said that they needed broccoli. You had to give dogs broccoli and whole vegetables. What say you to the whole broccoli diet for dogs and cats?
I mean, as you know, I mean, there are some positive, you know, they've identified certain micronutrients within plants that can have some positive benefits if you look at them just on their own. But they forget that the anti-nutrients, I mean, one of the big ones I know that has come up and I think about was, you know, is oxalates. And one of the problems we get with, certainly with cats, is kidney stones and kidney failure. And certainly
Right.
oxalates will cause stones in the urinary tract, and they will even seed the struvite crystals. So even if they're not, you know, even if they're not there as the whole stone, they will help to seed other stones causing it. So, you know, you know, we are getting other problems as a result of feeding plants within that. And again, it's this whole myth about roughage. Oh, you've got to give them plant material because they need roughage. And it's like, actually the opposite is true. Because once you swap a dog from kibble onto the proper raw meaty bones diet, then actually what happens is the volume that comes out the back end goes down to about a third of what it previously was, which shows how much is indigestible and unsoluble. And again, this causes a problem with site diversion here, causes problems in the parks. You know, we see these lumps of dog poo sitting on the ground, and the reason why is because it's all plant-based, so it's insoluble, indigestible fiber that the dogs can't digest. They get no benefit from it nutritionally, and then it bulks everything up, comes out the back end, and just sits there, and even the insects can't deal with it. It's that toxic. And so you've got a health hazard problem in the park. But coming back to the dogs, you know, once you're on the proper diet, you know, the feeding of them is some very basic, easy rules, because when the volume goes down like that and there's bone in it as well, you know, that they have to strain a little bit to get it out. But if you think back to the wild, part of that dogs have got anal glands on part of the anus, surprisingly, and when they defecate, then it expresses the anal glands. And so part of defecating for dogs in the wild is actually territory marking to a certain degree as well. And what happens in dogs which they're fed plant material is the anal glands don't get properly expressed when they're going. And so you get impaction of the anal glands and infection in there, and then they have problems and all the rest of it. And actually, similarly, interesting your idea in this, I think that's why the prostate in men is right close to the end as well. Because I think that stimulation of defecating perhaps has an action on the prostate to keep it, you know, empty it a little bit and keep it healthy. And I wonder, maybe is that why we're seeing more prostate cancer in men?
Yeah, interesting. And well,
apart from the inflammatory thing of the diet, you know, that's also part of it. But there's, you know, it's this little physical aspect of it that we're missing potentially as well.
It's a very good point, and it's worth exploring because it is right there. I mean, that's how you check someone's prostate is transrectally, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I think I have like PTSD from every prostate exam I've ever given somebody, but
Sure.
and probably they do too. But
vets don't like doing anal gland expulsions either.
Well, that was the thing. I had a friend of mine who had a pug. And they were saying there's this like, yeah, you have to get their anal gland expressed all the time. They just get clogged up, and it's just like, well, first of all, it's just a mutant, you know. I mean, that thing, those sort of animals just aren't supposed to exist. But that makes sense. So like in a pug, would that, if they were be fed like a raw food diet, would that need the
Yeah,
excretion as well, or be able to do it themselves?
absolutely. When you're on the right diet, everything works. And as I say to people, when you're on the right um, ancestral evolutionary diet, when you have eaten sufficient to be satiated, it is automatically correct for energy, protein, fat, carbs, micronutrients, everything. And that's why it's so uncomplicated, because in the nature, animals don't have to work out whether they've got this idea of a balanced diet. I mean, that's a construct, human construct.
Yeah.
Because when you're on the right diet, everything is automatically correct, and it'll be balanced, for want of a better word, over a few meals, over a fortnight or so. And the body's more than capable of taking out what it needs. So provided there is a sufficiency, then everything, the body takes what it needs. But if the right diet is there, that satiation level actually determines that actually everything there is in the right proportions and in the right amounts. And we don't have to think any more about it. It's really not that complicated and not that difficult. And yet, owners are taught that they don't have the knowledge to know how to feed their cats and dogs by doing it themselves. So therefore, they've got to hand that power over, and they've got to buy this packet or this bag or something. And of course, because the pet food companies want that to be the sole source for the whole of the animal's life, they've come up with this concept of balance. So everything is, because you can't have a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday bag. You've got to have one bag that does every day, every week, every year. And so what happens is, because they don't really know what they're doing, and the research is done to make sure that looks like they know what they're doing. Then you get the diseases happening, and then they go on to the more expensive prescription diets or science diets, however they want to call them. And it's all wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong. As you can imagine, get a bit frustrated about it. It might be coming across.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing too. I mean, it's a bit cheeky, isn't it? Saying that this kibble is science diet. Science actually says the diet is meat, right? So, and that's what you're saying. That's what the data shows. That's what just observing the world around you shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, what you were saying about the dogs liking you because of you're a carnivore, there's some truth to that. Because in a wolf pack, if only certain dogs are allowed to eat the organ meat, because it puts a certain aroma about them, which determines the hierarchy of that pack. So what you were saying, although you were joking, there's an element of truth to that as absolutely. And again, and you think, well, so we need to understand these things, because if we're not careful, we're going to cause behavioural problems between dogs, because they're going to be sniffing and sensing things that we don't fully appreciate. Yeah, actually, you might be sending a signal out to another dog that actually I'm actually quite aggressive, or I'm the kingpin here, and the other dog thinks he's the kingpin, and before you've got some antagonism going on, which they didn't need to have. But so that there's all these subtleties that we really, we scratch the surface at really understanding it all, and the more we leave it to nature, the more likely we are to be correct. I really think we overcomplicate everything, and we sort of we disempower owners to actually understand that they're more than capable, and their animals are more than capable of knowing what's good for them.
And you were saying earlier about oxalates in cats. I remember I've heard so many times my family members and things like that have had cats that have crystals in their bladder and their problems. That probably was that. And then I remembered, from my talk in Plants Are Trying to Kill You, I talked about some of the diseases that livestock tend to get, and one of them was named Big Head, and that was, from my understanding, that was from oxalates. And they're getting
it's a calcium issue. Yeah.
Is it? And that's some of the things. So as a vet, like I wasn't making that up, was I? I mean, like animals that
No,
get into the wrong forage, they get very sick, and we have names for them, don't we? You
yeah.
know, and do you know much about the livestock medicine side of things of animals
I
getting into the
mean,
wrong forage?
yeah, I mean, there are as you say, even the herbivores, that
Mhm.
they can be susceptible to, things like ragwort or yew. So I
Mhm.
mean, ragwort, a lot of the problems in plants for animals seem to be alkaloids.
Mhm.
Um, but there are others. I mean, obviously you've got the nightshade, so potato, um, which is the same for humans as well. You get cyano compounds, so you get hydrogen cyanide being produced when it's metabolized. Um, Sycamore, you get saponins. They can cause bloat. So if cattle eat or sheep eat far too much, if there's too much clover in the grass, then the
Mhm.
saponins basically make everything in the rumen sort of froth, and so
Mhm.
then the gas can't escape, and so it just blows up, and they get these swollen bellies, and it causes, I mean, massive fracture. Well, it's the only way to release it is to put a trocar in and cannula and actually release it through the side door, as it were. But it's plants, although herbivores are adapted to eating plants, they are only adapted to eating certain plants in certain volumes. Um, and I was thinking about it the other day. It's like, are there actually any animals that eat plants and actually digest plants directly themselves? Because actually, you've got ruminants have got this four stomach sort of arrangement at the front end of the cows and the sheep and the goats, where and it's the bacteria in the rumen that actually do the digesting and create the triglycerides and release the energy and all the rest of it. And then you've got the horses, which are hindgut fermenter. So the fiber goes in, and it's the bacteria in the hindgut that then ferment it and release the nutrients. And it's like, well, how much are these animals actually digesting the plant material themselves? It seems to me it's actually 90% done by bacteria and only a small amount done by the animals anyway. And then
Mhm.
the only other technique that I know that's different from hind or foregut fermenters is rabbits, where they eat it twice to,
Mhm.
they're coprophagic, to pass it
Mhm.
through to try and get the nutrients out. There'll be some bacteria along the way that have done something, but it'll be a bit too close to the end to get enough nutrients out. So they recycle it again and get it out the second time round. So you know, even herbivores aren't that brilliantly, in some ways, adapted to eating plants directly.
Mhm.
They've got to use bacteria to do it. So you know, and the microbiome. We are so conscious of how the microbiome is so important for immunity and mental health and all sorts of things in humans. Now you just think, well, how if we're we're raising animals sort of on these unnatural diets where lots of grains, but they would actually just be eating forage normally. What are we, that must be changing their microbiome as well. So what is that doing to their other physiology in other ways? And, I'm, we really do need to start getting back to regenerative farming. And,
Mhm.
we're learning all this information and we're not utilizing it. Humans are stupid, but they've got no wisdom whatsoever. Um, they've got knowledge, but they've got no idea how to apply it. And if something comes along, they're so slow to adopt it, um, that you think, well, all we're doing is storing up health problems for them, putting them through a lot of stress. And we want good welfare as vets. We should be pushing through, good welfare. We shouldn't be supporting bad practice just because we can give something injectable. That wasn't why I became a vet. I wanted to make the world a better place, for the animals and for us. And I think if we do that farming bit properly and actually take into consideration what we have learned about, metabolic diseases and what's good and bad in plants, and sort of the dangers of grains and how they go to sugars and then become addictive, even in herbivores, and all the rest of it. It's like, well, why aren't we using this knowledge? We've got it, but we're just not applying it. And then it's not helping the welfare. And then as vets, we've got monopoly on what we do in treating animals because we're supposed to be overseeing the welfare. It's like, well, there's precious little bit going on. There is on some directions, yes, the vets are absolutely on top of the welfare aspect of it. But when it comes to nutrition, we are absolutely nowhere to be seen, as far as I can see, for the vast majority. And I'm saying it's not willful. But it is refusal to look at the evidence and accept it and adjust accordingly. And that's there's all sorts of ways that people need to start supporting their regenerative farmers and buy locally, and they'll be getting better food for themselves, but they'll also be supporting those farmers who are trying to improve the welfare of their animals that they look after, at least, and promote that whole way of producing our food and keeping it local as well. So wherever your field and my field absolutely tied in that field, and we need to be sort of more mindful of research in both and how they actually apply to all.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the basis. It's the fundamental basis of all health, and I like the point that you made there that even herbivores are really not good at digesting plants. It's actually very difficult to turn plant tissue into animal tissue. Very easy to turn animal tissue into animal tissue, and yet we're trying to pretend that the tissue that we're made out of, the same meat and flesh and fat that we're made out of, is somehow, if we ingest that same materials, that's somehow toxic to us. Or is it the building blocks to make everything that we're made of? Like, wouldn't that make more sense? I mean, and you're talking about like the digestion. Yeah, they don't digest much. I was doing research for the book I'm writing, and I couldn't find any animals that could break down fiber at all. Even termites don't do it. It's the microorganism. So cows have bacteria. Termites have protozoa. The protozoa are what eat the fiber, and again release short chain fatty acids, saturated fat, and they die off, and then they become protein for the larger organism. So no animal can break down fiber. I had heard at one point it was just vertebrate animals, but I don't think that's even true of invertebrates, at least none that I can find. And so
it's mad, isn't it? And yet they're now even on the dog front, they're trying to produce vegan diets for dogs, and you go, hang on a minute. And then the justification is, well, they're omnivores, so therefore we can feed the plant bit. And you go, actually, dogs are more carnivore in terms of their anatomy than humans. And I agree with you. I think we are primarily carnivores as well. So, dogs have got these jaws that just hinge up and down. There is no sideways grinding movement possible, because when they're crunching bones, that would, if the jaw suddenly slipped off to the side, it would probably dislocate it. So the jaws are actually anatomically unable to open other than up and down. They've got no teeth for grinding any plant material at all. It's all for ripping and tearing and crunching and chewing. And then they've got this really strong acid. They've got a relatively short digestive tract. They've got no fermentation area. And yes, they might have a couple of enzymes that wolves didn't have, but we've got enzymes that we can, metabolize sugar, but it doesn't mean, therefore, it means it is a required part of the diet. And yet all these bogus reasons to justify feeding plant material and carbohydrates to dogs and cats when they're carnivores, and again they try and break down the distinction. Well, cats are obligate carnivores because they've got to have meat, but dogs are facultative carnivores. Like, no, there is only two. There's only, you've got carnivore, omnivore, and herbivore. Sub breakdowns of those are a construct to justify, because you've got an agenda to do something differently. And let's get this, call it for what it is. It's bullshit. And that the dogs are designed, there's nothing about them that says they're designed to have carbohydrates and have plants that provide those and all the anti-nutrients. And it's like, the meat produces everything that they need, and the bone, obviously, and minerals, and the marrow in the bone as well. It's interesting. Something else, John, my good friend dairy farmer, told me that hadn't occurred to me before. Do you know the reason why foxes go into a chicken pen and they kill all the chickens?
Why's that?
It's because the head is the most nutritious part, because it's got the brain in there. So it's more efficient for them to kill lots of individuals and eat the heads than to kill one and eat the whole body.
Yeah, no kidding. Interesting.
How clever is that?
Yeah. So they just munch the heads on multiple.
They basically decapitate them, get the nutrition from that, and bugger off.
Wow.
And so it's actually it's a sort of a hunting strategy that there's actually, when you realize that that's why they're doing it, it makes perfect sense. So definitely, this is. And the other things, you can't feed dogs or cats chicken bones because they'll kill them. And I go, well, how many dead foxes have you seen? They scavenge and they eat, and some of them will eat more than just the heads, but you don't see dead foxes draped around the countryside because they've struggled. And maybe my terrier's 14 now, 14 and a half, and say his favorite food is drumsticks. And he just crunches it up, and it's gone in a couple of minutes. And it's just they get used to doing it. And I think also they put taste enhancers in some of the commercial pet foods as well. I actually came across a chap who actually admitted that he'd been consulted with by a cat food company to work out the best taste enhancer to use with cats to make them eat the food and then make it addictive. So, what you see these adverts on telly, and they say 8 out of 10 owners say their cats prefer it. And what they should be saying is 8 out of 10 owners don't know their cats are addicts. And it's, and that's why brand awareness comes. My dog or my cat will only eat these brands. It's there. Actually, your cat, if it was wild, wouldn't care what it ate when it's in the wild. You don't see a cheetah walking past a gazelle carcass and go, well, I don't eat gazelle. I only like zebra. It just doesn't happen. They'll eat and scavenge what they have. And then you look at, I saw a wild program the other day, and there was a big male lion on there, and you looked at him and you go, we sort of almost, we're groomed to think that body condition, we've got it all right. You looked at this cat, this lion, and my first impression was, it looks thin. And I go, no, catch on, Roger. That lion is fit ass. He's just caught that and eaten it. He's got what he needs. He doesn't need to be carrying any more weight, which is why you don't get heart disease and you don't get diabetes in wild animals. But we get them in our cats and our dogs these days, because we're feeding them all the wrong diets, and we sort of trained ourselves to think underweight, or what we think is, what is actually fit. We're sort of conditioned to think that that's underweight, and it isn't. And then it's just bonkers, isn't it? I mean, it's you just don't get these diseases in the wild. And the other one that get thrown at me, wolves they don't live as long as dogs. Go, yeah, that's because they've got to catch their prey. They might get kicked in the process. And actually, if something happens and it breaks a teeth, teeth are designed to kill us, because if something happens to a tooth, then infection gets in, or an infection gets in, then it starts to smell. You try creeping up on something that's got a really good sense of smell when you've got a rotten mouth. And also, if you've got a rotten mouth just underneath your nose, you can't smell the prey before it can smell you. So, that living in the wild is a very different environment from what we provide for them. And the only time, the other thing, wolves will eat fruit, and go, well, they might do. They might have a little bit of fruit when it's ripe. But I think that's because it switches on the Randall cycle just before winter. So they put a bit more fat on their body to condition them for the winter, when they've got to maybe, food's a little bit more scarce. So, but just because they might eat a bit of blueberry or a bit of raspberry or whatever berry it comes across, in the wild, doesn't mean that therefore we should be giving it every day. It's a completely different scenario. And I think animals go through cycles of body condition at different times of the year. And I think there's a metabolic and physiological reason why that happens as well. And yet we tend to keep our animals the same all year round, and we'll feed them foods that would only ever be seasonal, and then wonder why we've got health problems with them. We just got so far away from thinking straight about what's going on. And I often say to people, if you don't see it on a natural history program on TV, well, you don't have to do it for them. So they don't cook, they don't attack a wheat fields, they don't dig vegetables, they don't go down to the supplement shop, they don't go down to the pre-ground shop with their carcass to then get it processed for them. They eat raw meat and bones, and they scavenge it. They don't hunt, and they don't need anything else, and we don't need to do anything else for them. And when you keep it simple, that's how it is. Everything else just falls into place.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it would say, well, animals in the wild, wolves in the wild, they don't live as long as dogs. Like, well, first of all, the average life expectancy of dogs is halved in the last 40 years. And second of all, what about wolves in the zoo? They live way longer than in the wild. They're not having the dangers of the wild, and they live much, much longer, and they're perfectly healthy. They don't get these diseases unless they're fed the wrong diet. If they're fed just meat, they're fed just normal food that they should eat, they don't get the human diseases. That's why there's science that say don't feed the animals. It makes them sick to eat the wrong thing. And yet we forget that applies to animals like our pets.
It only applies to animals, Anthony. It doesn't apply to humans.
Well, yeah,
or
domestic
dogs or our cats.
Yeah, exactly. Or birds or anything, or your menagerie. I mean, it's just so silly. One of the things that I came across as well was some similarity. So, we have these similarities in diseases. Obviously, we have the so-called human diseases that are increasing in dogs and cats.
Yeah.
And what the hell is a human disease, right? And why is it going up? But one of these diseases that I found out about that was very similar was muscular dystrophy exists in cows. There's a bovine form of muscular dystrophy, but it's known to be. This is the thing. Cows are worth something, right?
Yeah.
This is a product, and you say, hey, we need to figure out what's going on here because this is money. And so we pay people to find this out. Humans are worthless. It's just like, oh, you die. Oh, shoot. So bad. We pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get futile treatment, and then we die anyway. And it's like, oh well. But if a cow dies, it's like, well, that's someone's money. Like, someone's responsible. And so actually things get done. And so they found these, big head, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. They're like, well, what the hell is going on? Oh, they ate these plants. These plants are bad for them. Okay, well, that's causing that. Here's what we do. And then muscular dystrophy. To my understanding, it was from a selenium deficiency. And so if you have a selenium deficiency, then they'll get muscular dystrophy. But from what I understand, or what I was told, was that it's the same muscular dystrophy as we get in humans, which begs the question: is this nutritional? A nutritional deficiency in humans? Has anyone bloody well checked that? Do you know much about that?
I can't remember. Was it Otto van Warburg or Linus Pauling who said every disease is nutritional?
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Linus Pauling.
Okay, makes sense.
Who got the Nobel Prize, obviously, and very famous with vitamin C. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, that there are nutritional deficiencies, and again, you sort of look at the micronutrients. They just sort of talk about sort of the ones that are there in the biggest amounts, and you go, well, okay. So I sort of tend to think of things slightly the other way around. So if you've got something that's there, supposed to be there at 5 parts per million, but it's only there at 4, it doesn't sound like very much compared to something that's supposed to be there in milligrams. But actually, 5 to 4 is a 20% loss.
Mm.
If that micronutrient actually is really important for how that enzyme over there functions, or that actually could be the limiting, you're only as good as your weakest link. And so it's like the amino acid profile in plants, isn't it? Your protein quality is only as good as the presence of the amino acid that's the most limiting factor in the amino acid that's there. And I think the same is true from micronutrients all the way down. And so but we tend to focus and think the most important things are there in the biggest amounts. Actually, no, they're all supposed to be there in the correct amounts. And actually, it's the deviation from that, the biggest deviation from what's supposed to be there at its most natural level, is actually the weakest link in that chain, and it's the most restrictive element of that diet or whatever. So we just need to think about things in different ways, I think. And what's there in the most amount doesn't necessarily mean it's the most. It is important. I'm not saying that potassium and sodium aren't important, but actually there's a lot more leeway in terms of amounts that you can have within the diet there. Whereas something which is supposed to be there as a trace, actually there's very much less leeway in terms of whether it's there or not there. And and again, the whole epigenetics thing, it all feeds into that as well. And biophysics, I'm a great believer that actually biophysics is the fundamental thing to how the body works, not biochemistry. And it's not taught as a subject. We need to rethink how we think about the body and incorporate all these new ideas that come into. I'm sure you come across Fourth Phase Water by Jerry Pollack and others as well. There's we don't take these things into consideration where we should. Medicine is very slow to adopt different ways of thinking. So protein structure is all to do with the biophysical environment around it, and yet that determines how enzymes and cell membranes and everything functions, and yet we don't take any of that into consideration. It just, the mind boggles. Again, it's another example of how much we think we know, but how little we do actually know, and how all these things fit together. And that's why we need to stick to our ancestral diet, because it just automatically takes care of those things that we are completely ignorant about. And I think keep it simple, stupid is an acronym that's used in all sorts of things from business, but equally applicable in nutrition and medicine and everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sort of spoke about the increased prevalence in diseases in domesticated pets, but how large of a burden is this? Is it small? Is it large? I mean, how much has this grown in recent years? Are we just sort of being a bit too sensitive about this, or is this a major issue?
It's a major issue. I mean, cancer in dogs is now approaching 1 in 4. Obviously, in humans, we often we recognise that lifetime stress lifestyle can have a big factor in that. Well, I'm sorry, but most pets don't have much stress in their life. They don't have to worry about heating. They don't have to hunt for themselves. It's put in front of them. That they're not under huge pressure to pay the mortgage or the bills or all the rest of it. They don't have the same stresses that we know suppress our immune system and reduce, have cortisol problems and all the rest of it that can lead to other diseases. So as far as I'm concerned, the biggest issue in animal health is nutrition. And if we're suddenly approaching 1 in 4 dogs, getting cancer, then we've got something majorly wrong. And yet there have been studies to show that we're, processed foods are pro-inflammatory. And obviously cancer is a localized symptom of a systemic problem, which is inflammation. And so what we're seeing is, a manifestation of the bad diet down through the generations. And as you say, the lifespans are getting shorter and shorter. And it tends to be the larger dogs apparently seem to be more affected. So their lifespan is coming down, and you get some big dogs like, I don't know, Great Danes, sort of 6 to 8 years is seen as quite a good lifespan for a dog. And yet I've got one of my clients who's raw feeds her Great Danes and they'll live to 15. So, it is possible. It is possible. I mean, my last terrier lived to 17. Boots is approaching 14. Or no, he's over 14 now. He'll be 15 next birthday. So, we've got hope we get a good few years out of him yet. But, it is possible when the diet and the lifestyle is good and we provide everything for them. And we're seeing a lot more autoimmune diseases. And a lot of skin diseases, and yet for me, the skin is an extension of the gut. And it's actually, if you think about it, it's just the internal bit of the skin that goes internally. So what you see happening in the skin is actually a mirror to what's happening in the gut. And then a lot of dogs get itchy ears. Well, the ears are a mirror to what's happening on the skin generally, just because the airflow isn't so good there. Problems get concentrated in the ears. So if you've got a dog that's itchy and got ear problems, you haven't got a hope in hell of getting it right unless you actually address the diet and get the gut healed. Because without the gut being healed, you're going to get proteins and things crossing a leaky gut barrier and setting up immune issues, which the skin, people forget that it's a huge organ of excretion, not just our barrier between our insides and the environment. So, it's the biggest organ of the body. It's involved in excretion. So, all these toxins and things that the body's trying to shove out, it can't shove it out through the urinary tract and it can't shove it out through the digestive tract. The only place left to the lungs, obviously, it has a smaller degree of excretion from there. But there's, the main part of it then is the skin. And then, of course, things are on the skin that are hurting because the body's trying to get them out. And then the dog scratches at it. So, don't be surprised if we've got inflammation there. So the skin is a mirror to the gut, and you can't heal the gut. And I'd say probably see the same in humans. I mean, I'd imagine eczema and psoriasis are actually they're a window into what's going on in the gut in those situations as well, I suspect. I'm not a human expert to say that, but to me it makes sense from what I've seen on the veterinary side and my experience in getting owners to swap from commercial to raw and the improvements they can get. That's what's going on. And the same, I know something of your podcast that you've mentioned how that can take a little while, and also the importance of being strict about the diet as well. I remember you telling me one story. I think one of your clients, she was still using spices or something for cooking her steaks and still had some autoimmune symptoms. And you think, okay, well, that makes sense because people get peanut allergies and they don't actually have to have an awful lot of peanuts to get this massive anaphylactic reaction. So it makes sense, the sort of pennies started dropping. And you think, God, yeah, okay, so actually the plant material could be quite a lot more significant, even if it's there in a very, very small amount, because once you've got that degree of sensitization there, then you've got to eliminate it and be really strict in order to allow that to calm down and settle down and heal, and then go back. And as I say, it's been not. I mean, I sort of knew these things to a certain degree already, but the pennies hadn't dropped actually as to how crucial and how important they need to be to get things right in some cases, and as a result of that, how long sometimes it takes being on the correct diet for everything comes right. And I know from what I've heard from you that that's your experience as well.
Yeah, the spices thing, those really harsh, strong tastes. You only need a little bit of it, and you have this big, strong flavor. You're tasting the worst of the toxins in that plant. and the most harmful ones. That's what your brain, your tongue is warning you about. It's like, do not eat this one. Yeah, I mean, people were doing the cinnamon challenge for a while on YouTube. They're just a spoonful of cinnamon. See if you can swallow it. Your body will reject it. And it will force you out. You'll be coughing and spluttering and choking and spitting this stuff out, and your body's just rebelling because there's so many harsh toxins in there that you're going to have very strong flavor, and that's what your body's warning you about. There's a book that I got for Christmas from my mom. It was just called Most Delicious Poisons, and it was all about spices, all the different spices that we use, and it was about these are like the most toxic parts of the plant, and that's why they have that strong flavor. And you're not wrong about the gut and the skin in humans. There are a number of maladies of the gut that can display as rashes as well. You can get rashes with celiac and Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and these other sorts of things. They can manifest as on the skin and have rashes as well. So and then psoriasis, you can get that elsewhere, psoriatic arthritis and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see if there's a correlation, with something going inside, what was going on inside. And they're autoimmune. So a lot of autoimmune conditions travel together. And so, you never know.
What do you say to your patients? I'm sure you get it on the human side. Golden paste, I'm sure you've heard of it. Curcumin, freshly ground pepper, and coconut oil, because of the the turmeric and the curcuminoids in it. And obviously it's got really positive. You can't, if you search on the internet, and it cures everything apart from death. But so it's sometimes difficult because obviously there are, we do know there are benefits from curcuminoids, and we know piperazine in the black pepper helps the body absorb it. What do you say if you've got clients who go, well, I'm taking this, the golden paste, or I'm taking the supplements that have got these beneficial plant ingredients in there. How do you? What's your response to that? Because obviously they're doing it because they think they're helping themselves, but obviously, are they? Or where it's so difficult because a lot of the research is done to prove something rather than actually find out objectively. It then becomes such a weight of evidence saying that it's beneficial that actually there may be something they're saying that it's harmful, but you've got to get down to page 53 of PubMed to find it. And yet actually it's the crucial paper you need to see to understand fully what the risk benefit side of things are.
Yeah. Well, I just point out that, there, of course, there are going to be good things in plants. We use these things medicinally all the time. There's aspirin in willow bark. There's digitalis and foxglove, but there are other things too. And there are other things that can cause harm. And oftentimes these things that maybe we want that in certain circumstances, they're beneficial, but in other circumstances, they're detrimental. I mean, what is a medicine if not a poison that in just certain circumstances confers more benefit than harm? Well, outside of those circumstances, you're just getting the harm and you're not getting the benefit. And so you need to know exactly what you're taking, exactly how much you're taking, the dosage. You don't really know that with the plants that you're getting. And it has to be a very specific set of circumstances, not just all the time, or else that would just be a nutrient and that wouldn't be a medicine. And there are no nutrients that we need in plants that we can't get from meat. And you get the bad with the good, because they have a lot of other toxins in there that you don't want. And so, they say, well, it's anti-inflammatory effects. It's like, all right, well, it has more inflammatory factors than anti-inflammatory factors. And we need to remember that as well. As a friend of mine, Richard Smith, he has a health and fitness company, and he was a professional bodybuilder and did it naturally, and did it on keto and then carnivore, and was like European. He's a British national champion and pro champion, and then European pro champion as well. And he did it naturally. The British championship was a tested event, and the European one was an untested event. So he went up against people that were, juicing and things like that, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
And he won. And so he won, but he's like, the next step up, he would have to basically grind for about 10 years to build up the mass to really have any sort of hope without PEDs. So he just said that's enough for me. And but he had a company that, they made supplements and these sorts of things. And he had things just like that. And then he started finding out more about actually all these other things that are in turmeric and curcumin and black pepper that were actually really, really detrimental. And
Right.
so there was just like saying that, oh, this is so great. Like you say, hey, maybe they're cherry picking out like looking at these compounds in isolation. They're not considering
Yeah.
it in the whole plant, or they're just pretty rubbish studies in the first place. So he started digging into this a lot more, and he realized that his product was crap, and he pulled it. And he made an announcement. He's like, "Hey, I'm not selling this anymore. If you guys want to return it, I'll take it." And he said, "I've got there's like a whole warehouse full of this stuff, but like I'm not going to sell this stuff because it's not good. It's not good for people." And so yeah, it's it's just funny what people get sold into, but it's natural, isn't it? Well, you want something natural. Well, arsenic's natural, so
I've got another. I say dog shit's natural, but it's
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
but it's on the veterinary side. But it is, I mean, I'm a natural vet, so I do all of my work is sort of holistic. But I'm very objective and try to be very grounded at what I do and looking at what I'm doing. And if it's not appropriate, I'll tell people. And if it is, then I'll do what I do. But there is this natural, as you say, an assumption that just because it's got the word natural in it, it is automatically 100% safe and effective, which isn't necessarily true as well. Yeah, it is a problem, isn't it? Where cognitive dissonance and bias. You're looking for the it happens on the nutritional front, the confirmation bias to prove what they want to prove, but we've got to be careful on the other side that we don't do the same in the opposite direction. So it's it is. It's a minefield, and it's difficult to know what research you can trust and what you can't trust sometimes as well. Which so people need to get in tune with their body and sort of look for the small signs. I think to help work out what's good for us and what's not good for us. 'Cause there is a certain degree of individuality as well. I mean, one of the things I've seen with some of the biohackers, I saw one who kept on saying, "Oh, we need to have beets. We need to have beets because you need nitric acid, and you'll age if you don't have your nitric acid." And I sort of messaged him back and said, "Well, I do believe arginine is a precursor for that. And we can get that from meat," but didn't want to hear it really. So we just got to be wary of agendas and make sure we haven't got one that's blinding us to essential information. But I think when you're on the ancestral diet, you're on pretty safe ground from that point of view, because as I said, when you get it right, everything is automatically taken care of.
Yeah, definitely. And it is difficult to know what studies and what literature is reliable. I mean, this isn't just me saying this. There's the editor of the Lancet said, I don't know, a few years ago, he said that medical research is unreliable at best.
Yeah, Richard Horton, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and they said that at least half of these studies are seriously conflicted, extremely biased, or just flat out fraudulent. And they've doctored the numbers and they've faked all these sorts of things. And it wasn't just him either. It was Richard Horton was the editor of the Lancet, but then there were others as well. There was one who was like the editor.
Yeah, there was an American journal, wasn't there? One of the American journals. She said, she's been a sort of chief editor for decades, and has suddenly come to the conclusion that it's totally unreliable as well.
That's it. Yeah, it was. It was the New England Journal of Medicine. Yeah, in fact, she'd been editor in chief for years and years and years. And she said, she said it was just you couldn't. It was no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research. You just had to just sort of understand that this was flawed and fraudulent. You had corporate capture. You had, and I mean, it used to be that you just basically wouldn't trust anything until you had it replicated and duplicated by an independent lab, right? Now people just publish. And I think that's probably part of the era of publish or perish. You just have to just put shit out there. And so they're just,
Yeah.
the literature is just flooded with studies that are mostly useless, and then others that are completely uncorroborated and haven't been replicated. And so they say, oh, look at this. So we did this. And that's what it is. Well, that's what it is then. Okay, did anybody else go and replicate the experiment to see if you got similar results? If you didn't, you have to just sort of take it with a grain of salt, and people aren't even and they're not even doing rigorous studies. They're like the nurses study. I mean, what a joke that is. You send a bunch of nurses a questionnaire once a year and say, hey, what did you eat last year? And then they send that back in. It's like, oh, okay, you're gonna remember every meal that you had for an entire calendar year. Good luck.
There was a twin study which was equally ridiculous as well, wasn't there? I mean, I think one of the figures that people, because some of the techniques that I use, they are published in sort of the mainstream journals and stuff, and my response to that, well, from what I understand, 60% of what was once published saying it was absolutely correct is later proven to be absolutely wrong. So the fact that I'm not in a journal makes me more likely to be right.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And well, it's like the old there's an address at the Harvard medical school graduation, I think in the 30s, and they said to the graduating students, they said, just remember, half of the things that you learned here at Harvard are going to turn out to be wrong, but no one's going to tell you which half. So you have to figure that out. You have to find out. You have to search. You have to experiment. You have to trial these things yourself to figure out what was right and what was wrong, and discover new things yourself. People forget that. We get so dogmatic. It takes so bloody long to finish your degree and then finish your training and residencies and fellowships that all you're doing is just geared is just like take in information, regurgitate it, take in, regurgitate, and at no point have you taught people how to think for themselves. And
I think I'm quite lucky. My brain only works by if I don't understand something from basic principles, then I'm not very good at just regurgitating and blindly doing. But if I understand why I'm doing something and the basics of it and what it's all about, then I'll take it to places that perhaps others don't go as well. But you've got to have that understanding and application to do it. And the other people, what you're doing, it's all anecdotal. And I go, well, the plural of anecdote is data.
Yeah.
There's a lot. How many carnivores people now are there? And how many carnivore animals and pets are there now? And again, the trouble with the vets is, because the proper raw meaty bones fed dogs and cats are so healthy, they don't see the vets apart from when they absolutely have to, fall over and break a leg or do something very, something serious. So, the overwhelming opinion that vets have of animals coming through their door is they're all sick. And so they don't see the raw ones. And then, of course, when something happens, it's a raw fed, or what it must have been that's caused it then. The fact that, 98% of the rest of their patients through the door that day were all kibble fed, and they don't want to draw the same conclusion to the diet because they might have sold it to them. It's such a double standard and missing the point of it, but, there are so many raw-fed dogs and cats out there that don't have problems, live to ripe old age, and the mother bugbear is the mix-up between common and normal. Okay, so older, arthritis in an old dog, it's not normal, it's common. Yeah. Because that means a dog that's 15 that hasn't got arthritis is abnormal. And it's not abnormal, it's just uncommon. And the reason for it is that the 15-year-old without arthritis will be raw fed. But it then makes you think, well, how much of the hematology and other ranges that we rely on as clinicians, how much, what is a normal range, or is that a common range? If a diet is fed properly, should this range actually be slightly shifted left or right, and should it be a lot narrower? Um, you know, because of so much of the research, especially in the veterinary side, the beagles or whatever breeds they're using for doing research in whatever area of medicine, they'll be doing them on, as far as I'm concerned, fundamentally diseased dogs because they're being fed the wrong diet. And so, how reliable is that research? Is reliable up to a certain degree, obviously, but sort of being pedantic about it and thinking about it. What is normal, what is common, and how much of what we understand is normal actually isn't, and it's actually common. And we should be shifting some of our parameters that we're analysing and looking at and recognising and thinking accordingly.
Yeah, I think that it is very important, like you said, just to think base principles, just fundamental principles. How does the body work? How eating ancestrally, eating what we're supposed to eat, and just letting your body work. It is very interesting how all these things work together and how complex and intricate they are, which of course we have no semblance of an understanding of to any real degree. But we don't have to. It's interesting. It's great. It's nice to learn about, but we don't have to know it. What we have to know is that you put in the right things and the right things happen. That's what you need to know, and that's what you need to do. And so I think it's very important. You just do that. You just do what you're biologically designed to do, and your body will work the way it's biologically designed to work. And you were saying the plural of anecdote is data. It's another word for anecdote is also real life.
Yeah.
Right. And so, if that doesn't line up with real life, like, I don't care. Oh, but what's the data say? What does the data say? I don't know. But I know what real life says. Real life says that we've been eating meat for 2 million years without any diseases. These diseases have shown up in the last 120 years. That's what real life tells me. And what real life tells me is that I have patients that come into me with Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, and obesity and depression and all these other sorts of issues, and I change their diet to the thing that you say is going to kill them and make all those things worse, and it does the opposite. That's what real life tells me. That's why I don't care. I don't care what a study says. I mean, most of these studies are flawed anyway. Most of these studies are, a survey that people fill out once every year or once every 2 years, or it's something like the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, the two most prestigious medical journals in the world. And yet the editors there said half of what comes out here is complete bullshit. So no, I don't care. I don't care what studies. Where's your study? Up your ass. I just don't care. Like, I have patients. Where are your patients? Where are your patients that are doing better on the standard recommendation diet than an ancestral diet? Name one, right? Like, I can name thousands that I've put on ancestral diets, and they've improved dramatically. I mean, it's in the hundreds of thousands now, just people that are just doing this around the world.
That's the thing. What we have to do, we have to breathe, we have to eat. We don't have to do a lot more than that. And it just makes me laugh. You think, well, if we shifted what we say about diet towards breathing, I'm sorry, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to breathe that air because it needs to come from a human bottle. I need to have put the gases together, in an aqualung before I can breathe, because that's a logical, extrapolation from what we're doing with feeding. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to breathe the air that's outside, if you don't mind. If you sort of think about it in those terms, it just shows how ridiculous, how we've got to control the diet, we've got to do for the cats and dogs, we've got to do all this processed stuff. It's like,
where's your data? Where's your data? Where are your studies showing that breathing air outside is good? Where is it? Well, where's your randomized control trial to show that parachutes work? You gonna use parachutes? Do what you want. Like, that looking at reality thing is a really important thing. You mentioned earlier a very good point that you make observations in the real world and then you try to study them. If you try to see why that's happening. But if you don't see something happening, if you see that something's not happening specifically, you're not going to have a study that shows a phenomenon that doesn't exist. If you just don't see, I have a study that says, that gravity doesn't exist. If you throw a rock, it'll just go into space. It was like, yeah, but I've thrown rocks. They don't go to space. I'm sorry, that's not what the data says. I was like,
Yeah. If you haven't got a paper, it can't be true.
That's it, and it's just like, but it's that absurd, you're just like, it disagrees with the observed phenomena. It disagrees with the real world. And so if it disagrees with that, it's wrong. It's what Richard Feynman said that as well. It doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. Well, if it doesn't agree with reality either, it's wrong. And, Einstein and Feynman did that. They'd have mathematical proofs. They try to figure something out, and then the technology would improve. They'd be able to observe something. Like, well, that was wrong. Throw it out. It didn't matter how great your equation was. It didn't line up with what we saw.
The frustrating thing is how long, we've known so much of these, obvious truths. I mean, and yet, as professions, the medical profession, the veterinary profession, we just ignore these inconvenient facts to what we want to do, what sort of the twisted research is telling us. I mean, there was a very famous human dentist called Sir Frank Collier in 1947. He was studying, teeth, and he basically said, animals fed their proper, ancestral diet do not get periodontal disease. And if you could just take out periodontal disease, how much improvement in health would that have worldwide? And yet that was said in 1947, and here we are, 2024, and vets are still pushing food which is causing obesity, which they say they're struggling to get on top of. Even though obviously animals, their diets are controlled that much more by people, because the animals can only eat primarily what they're given. So it means what we're giving them is fundamentally wrong if we're not correcting all those obesity problems. And then they're getting all these periodontal diseases. Was it something like 80% of dogs within 2 or 3 years have dental problems requiring dental interference? You go, well, in 1947 it was identified that animals fed the correct diet don't have any disease whatsoever. And these weren't just like 1 or 2 year old dogs. These were, bones and things that he'd seen for aged animals, and looked throughout, his research, and he was knighted, for Christ's sake, for his knowledge. And yet we're just completely dissing that and ignoring it, and then wondering why we do what we do, and then we're taking money for it. I mean, the morals and ethics of it are very questionable. And as I said a couple of times already, this isn't willful bad morals and bad ethics, but it amounts to that, because they're refusing to look in these directions and look at this knowledge, which in some cases has been known for decades. And then it's the animals who are suffering, and the owners, unfortunately, some of them, they want confirmation bias of what they're doing is correct as well, because they don't want to comprehend that maybe some of the animals and pets they've had in the past haven't become ill because of bad practice. And you can understand the psychology behind that as well. But it's like, okay, so we operated with the knowledge we knew at the time, and we just accept that we got it wrong. When I first qualified, I hadn't latched onto the raw feeding at that point. And my last terrier, the first few years of his life, I fed him kibble. And then when I realised, I didn't try and find reasons to carry on feeding him kibble. So I changed his diet. I wanted to do the best for him that I could for him going forwards, and beat yourself up for doing what you did up to a point. But it's like, you've got to forgive yourself at some point and go, well, I did what I did in good faith at that point too. I actually now got to move on and not, and do the right thing by my old terrier and now Boots. And that's all you can do. And don't get hooked up on the mistakes of the past. We are human. We make mistakes. We just got to move past them and strive to be as good as we can possibly be. And, I've always had an interest in my own health. Now, people used to laugh at me, or probably still do. And I say, my aim is to die healthy, because I don't want to be I don't want to go through the last 5-10 years of my age, sort of, crippled in pain and can't walk and can't do this and can't do that. It's like, I want to go out having a party when I'm 150 years old, because I think if you get it right, that's, our lifespan can be as, the average is 120, I think they say, don't they, for people. So, well, I want to go beyond that. But I want to be healthy beyond that as well. And that's the other thing with, dogs or cats are living longer these days. Well, how many of those years that they're living, and how many of those are on medication? The idea of health is we can be fairly self-supportive on that, and diet should be able, and well, it is capable of doing that for us if we do it correctly. And I enjoy my food. I miss the curry at times, but I'm doing it because I'm investing in my future health, not just what I'm doing now as well. And certainly for our cats and dogs, we want to have the best relationship we can with our pets, then we should be investing in their future health as best we can now as well. And I think owners fundamentally want to do that, but they're just taught that they actually, they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the wherewithal, and actually it's there. It's well known. I mean, Tom, who's, I think I mentioned earlier on, who stood for Royal College elections, he's written a couple of books. He wrote one originally called Raw Meaty Bones back in the 1990s to try and educate the veterinary profession. And, he was up for, he lives in Sydney, and he was up for an award for the Australian Veterinary Association. And because his book was the only one nominated, they decided not to give a prize that year. Yeah, absolutely. And then, he's just, in the last couple of years, he's written another one called The Multi-Billion-Dollar Pet Food Fraud. And, we had an early day motion in Parliament back in 2005 where the parliamentarians called into question the veterinary profession for feeding commercial pet food. Nothing has happened as a result of that. And we've got another petition, which we've got now, sort of trying to get a debate in Parliament as to whether we're doing the best by our pets by continuing to support feeding commercial pet foods. And it's we're just trying to raise awareness in whatever way we can. So really appreciate you having me on here, Anthony, so that we can raise these issues and make people think wider and appreciate the whole carnivore diet for all species that for whom it is relevant, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're more than welcome on. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great, conversing with you and speaking to you off camera and corresponding with you electronically as well. Roger, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can you please tell us where people can find you and follow you?
Yeah, I mean, my sort of work website is naturalhealingsolutions.co.uk. That's probably the best place. I've recently started a Substack, which you can link to from that website as well. And try and sort of spread the word and get the information out there, because information is power.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put that in the description. People can check it out, and please, everyone, let us know, like down in the description, what you thought of this show and what you feed your pets and what you're going to do with that as well. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.